Hello, Shiver Seekers. Are you ready to follow us into the unknown again? I'm Cynthia.
And I'm Stephanie. You have found the Dark Oak, take 2 of this episode.
We have just been talking for the last 30 minutes about our episode 1 of the Karen Reed case, and then we realized we never hit record.
It really is just a testimony to how much we just love talking to each other. We were just cruising along, just chatting it up, and I looked and said, maybe we should hit record. So the beginning of the year is we're just crushing it.
We are off to a good start, that is for sure.
Well, silver lining, we did catch it before we recorded the entire episode.
Right, which we have actually lost entire episodes before, so
I admit to nothing.
You can tell who's in charge of hitting the record button.
You can tell who's in charge of reminding someone to hit the record button.
Oh, goodness, yes. So we're just very grateful that we caught it after only 30 minutes of not recording.
Small potatoes.
Yeah, so that's our day. How are you, listeners? Well,
luckily we like hanging out together.
Oh, for sure.
Just another 30 minutes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One might say we did it on purpose.
Our husbands would definitely say we did that on purpose.
You do that every time, Cynthia. I'm starting to question. Yeah. Well, like we said, today is our episode 1 of our 2-parter on Karen Reed. And we feel this is very relevant because we're actually recording this episode a little earlier than we normally do because of the holiday season. But just 2 weeks after this episode is scheduled to air, as of right now, the day of this recording session, Karen Reed is scheduled to go to her second trial.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. Based on the timing of when these 2 parts are going to come out, it's like part 1, then part 2, then an update.
Right.
On what happened in the trial or what is happening in the trial, depending on how long the trial goes, right?
Right. If it goes, I don't know.
Oh, really?
Well, we'll see how you feel after the next 2 episodes.
Okay.
I'm quite frankly surprised it's going again, but
okay,
I'll tell you why.
All right. Well, let me go ahead. Let me get some of our business out of the way, and then you can get right into it.
Okay.
We are the Dark Oak, the mystery podcast with purpose. Each month through our charity, the Branch of Hope Foundation, we give a portion of all the money brought to us by our sponsors and Patreons to a nonprofit organization related to the first episode of the month. This month is Victim Connect Resource Center, which we covered in last week's episode about Ben Kita, and they are an excellent resource to help any kind of victims of crime. And I've said it several times. I think it's so lovely that they refer to victims as visitors. You know, we're just all passing through, and they're there to help hold hands and provide resources for any sort of victim of crime. So we're really happy to support them. If you would like to hear more about them, hang on to the very end of this episode, which I know you're going to anyway, because we need to know what's going on. So hang tight, or visit us at the Dark Oak, or visit us on our Instagram page.
Well, thank you, Stephanie. And I want to start off by saying I wanted to bring this case today for people like me and for podcast listeners who are podcast listeners like I am. So I personally have learned if I'm listening for pleasure or just listening because I'm interested in a case, not if I'm researching, but if I'm just listening for the sake of listening to a podcast, I sometimes struggle with the long form content, the ones that have multi-parts on the same case or several episodes in a series. I don't know why, maybe my attention span starts to wander. I think I prefer what we do here. The 1-hour episodes on a case, sometimes 2.
Since we are true crime podcasters, of course, I've tried to understand the psychology of true crime podcasters, like the host and then also listeners.
Mm-hmm.
It is very interesting to me how very specific people like to consume their true crime podcast content.
Oh, sure.
Very specific about single narrator, 2 narrators, female voices, male voices, banter, no banter, accent, no accent, long format, short format, 30 minutes only, 2-hour episodes. very specific about how
Very.
they like it. Is so
And I
funny.
am one of them. It cannot sound scripted. I want it to feel like a conversation among friends. Otherwise,
It loses
I
you.
just kind of get lost, you know?
What an incredible world we live in where there's something for everyone.
Right.
And we've heard it. I mean, we've heard it. People don't like some of our banter. They don't like our back and forth. They think we're too squeaky, our voices, whatever it is. And that's totally fine. There are podcasts out there that are going to fit for you.
Right.
And I think you just kind of have to like find your people, you
Right.
know? So yours is more of a short form us.
My favorite podcast just happens to be The Dark Oak.
Well, what do you know? And hopefully, if you're listening to us, this would be your preferred source of listening as well.
That's right. And because of that, I felt like The Dark Oak needed a simple two-parter on the Karen Reed case.
Well, look at you. A
So
case that you
here
would
we
listen
are.
to.
That's right, because a lot of the information on this case, there is so much information, and a lot of it does come from long form content, which I have absolutely enjoyed while researching. But for those of you who maybe don't have the time, this is for you. Let me start off by introducing you to Karen Reed and John O'Keefe. John and Karen had dated when they were in their 20s, but life took them in different directions, as it often does with young love. They ended up breaking up. But Karen and John reconnected in 2020 when John reached out to Karen via Facebook. He learned that Karen lived in Mansfield, Massachusetts, and worked as a financial analyst for Fidelity Investments, and she was an adjunct professor at Bentley University. So, smart lady, impressive.
Absolutely.
John lived in Canton, which is just south of Boston, and John had been a police officer for Boston Police Department since 2006. So he's also doing well. Now, unfortunately, John's sister Kristen died from a brain tumor in 2013, and then her husband Stephen passed away from a heart attack just 2 months after Kristen's death.
Oh, man.
Isn't that like
Ew.
blow after blow?
Yeah, that's rough.
And they're young. They had young children.
This is what I'm saying. This is like really unexpected. I imagine her sister is young too. Like these are not people you would expect to pass away.
Right. So John stepped in and he was raising his niece and nephew. And because he now was in the position to be taking care of children, which, as we know, absolutely changes your life, he started working an administrative position at the Boston Police Department because it was just easier to
And you know what?
do with
Good
the
for
kids.
him for stepping up. Like that's incredible.
Here's what I can tell you. John seems like a stand-up guy. Like from all accounts, all of his friends, his family, everything we know about John, he was just a good guy.
I don't know how he is in all the other aspects of his life, but to step up and rearrange your entire life to take care of children that you didn't create is, I think that's wonderful. Incredible.
It's a lot more than a lot of people would be willing to do.
Yes.
Soon after their reconnection, Karen and John began dating again. And since John had the kids, this meant that Karen would end up staying at John's house in Canton more often than not.
Okay.
Now, though the idea of rekindling an old love can be exciting in nature, this particular relationship may have had a bit too much excitement. Karen and John had what I personally would call a volatile relationship. And I don't mean that physically. It was just, there was a lot of arguing, a lot of chaos. There seemed to be major differences in their parenting styles, with John getting upset when Karen would, what he called, spoil the kids or let them have junk food. And Karen and John were not shy about their disagreements. They were known to openly argue, even if they were in public. And one such example of this was in the summer of 2021, when they were staying on vacation in a Cape Cod rental, and they had an argument in front of one of their friends. And it got so heated that one of these friends had to intervene.
I find those situations to be so incredibly uncomfortable.
They are. It's awkward.
They are really uncomfortable. And that is not to say that my husband and I don't have disagreements, but we do not do it out in public because I know how uncomfortable that makes me when I see other people
Right.
having a big conflict out in public. Ooh, I don't know. I just never know what to do.
I know. And we all have conflicts. So,
Of course we do.
Yeah,
That's
but
what
it's
I'm
just
saying.
kind of like, don't make eye contact. Just
Well, it just is so uncomfortable. And again,
Yeah.
not that I at all put on airs that we're like the perfect couple or
Right.
anything, but I just, Oh, it's so uncomfortable.
There's a time and a place.
Yeah, I agree.
And ideally, it's behind closed doors.
I think it's very important to never speak poorly about your spouse in like a big group of people or ever to like belittle them in front of other people.
Sure.
And I feel like it's almost impossible to have like a pretty loud argument without doing those things.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Yeah. I just try to avoid them.
Yeah.
All that to say, that's generally not my style.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing. Well, there was another example of maybe some of these awkward situations when, for New Year's going into 2022, Karen and John vacationed in Aruba with more than 30 of John's friends and family. And this was the first time Karen was able to meet a lot of John's friends.
Okay.
And during this trip, Karen met Marietta Sullivan. Now, Marietta had a sister named Laura, and John was the godfather to Laura's son. So that's the connection here.
Okay.
On New Year's Eve, while in Aruba, Marietta went to dinner with friends, and afterwards she returned to the hotel where everyone was staying. And while she was in the hotel lobby, she sees a very drunk John. And she can tell he's intoxicated, so she walked over to him to make sure he's okay because he was stumbling around a little bit. She wanted to make sure he was able to get wherever it was he was going. She said they almost passed like ships in the night. You okay? You okay? Yep. Moving on. But as she was walking away, she stopped when she heard a woman screaming, "John," across the hotel lobby. This was Karen. Karen comes up to John and is asking, "Who the F was that?" And she wasn't, I'm censoring here. I'm going to be censoring some language in this episode just because we try to keep it PG. It was not censored
Saying
at
that
the time.
about Marietta?
Yes.
Okay.
Karen sees John.
That seems aggressive.
Right. Who the F was that? So Marietta came up and introduced herself to Karen. And Karen's response was to tell her to go F off.
Wow. That's nice.
Karen was upset because she thought she saw John kissing Marietta, something Marietta denies happening. This is just another example of how they could sometimes interact with each other.
Seems extreme.
Right. And I share this with you because it's a story you're going to hear. It's a well-known story about John and the friends. But I just think it's kind of an important background.
Was there any comment on whether Karen herself was intoxicated at this point?
There wasn't, but I can only assume she was.
Okay, gotcha.
Now, unfortunately, less than a month later, John O'Keefe would be dead, and ultimately, Karen Reed would be charged with his murder. So January 28, 2022, a terrible snowstorm known as a nor'easter hit the Boston area. But that didn't stop Karen and John and some of John's friends and their wives from venturing out to downtown Canton for a night out. I'm going to give you the cast of characters. I'm going to go ahead and warn you. A lot of them are family members, so we have a lot of the same last names. Several of them work in law enforcement, so this part can be a little confusing. So if you get lost, feel free to just ask for clarification. At around 11 p.m., Karen and John went to the Waterfall Bar, and there they joined retired Boston police officer Brian Albert and his wife Nicole and their daughter Caitlin. They were joined by Brian's brother Chris Albert, who owned a popular pizza shop and was on the Canton Select Board, and he was there with his wife Julie. Another couple out that night was Jennifer and Matthew McCabe, and Jennifer is Nicole Albert's sister. And then finally, the group was joined by a close friend to the Albert family named Brian Higgins, who was an ATF agent, and he had an office in the Canton Police Department. So everybody here this night is somewhat related either by blood or marriage or career, something like that.
Right, sure.
After hanging out at the bar, someone in the group mentioned going over to Chris's pizza shop. It was officially closed, but I guess he'd let everybody come over and hang out and eat pizza during after hours.
Dang, I need a friend like that.
I know, right? It sounds really fun. So someone suggested doing it again this night, but understandably, Chris wasn't really down with the idea. You know, he's done with work. So instead, Brian and Nicole invited everyone back to their house located at 34 Fairview Road for an impromptu house party. Brian and Nicole lived very close to the bar, less than 2 miles away, and their son Brian Jr. and some of his friends were already at the house celebrating his birthday. Now, Karen said she didn't really want to go to the house party. She said that she wasn't even really sure that she and John were actually invited. It was such like an impromptu, like, hey, let's go here next.
Okay.
Her account was that she ended up driving to the house party, But she told John to go inside while she waited in the vehicle to make sure that they were actually welcome. She said he got out of the car. She watched him walk up to the threshold of the house, but right before he was going to walk in, she looked down and she never saw him actually enter the home. Karen said after a few minutes, he never came back, and she got upset with him for never coming back out to get her, so she left the house and drove back to John's house. The next morning, January 29th, sometime during the 5 o'clock hour, Matthew McCabe was startled awake to the sound of someone screaming his wife's name, Jen. He said the screaming was so loud he thought one of his kids was in the bedroom yelling for help.
Oh, boy.
He looked around and realized his wife Jen was actually on the phone, and the person on the end of the line screaming her name was Karen Reed. Karen was hysterical, saying that John never came home. Karen told Jen that she and John had gotten into a fight and that she'd left him at the Waterfall bar. Jen remembered that Chris Albert had stayed at the bar, and she thought maybe John had walked home with Chris because Chris lived close to the waterfall. But Matthew reminded Jen that they had seen Karen and John outside of Brian and Nicole's house the night before. So let me stop here.
Yeah, already this is not lining up.
What does this tell you? Everybody's intoxicated.
Oh, yes.
They don't even remember
Right.
what happened the night before.
Nobody knows what happened.
Right. Jen told Karen, come pick her up, and together they were going to drive over to Brian and Nicole's house, see if John was over there.
Okay.
Before picking Jen up, at around 5 a.m., Karen called another one of John's friends, a woman named Carrie Roberts, to tell her that John never came home. Now, Carrie said when she answered the phone, Karen said, quote, John's dead. Carrie, 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 before hanging up. She said Karen called back and said, I'm afraid John might be dead. He might have got hit by a plow. He didn't come home. I'm afraid something happened. Carrie drove to John's house and met Karen and Jennifer. And at this point, Karen was still saying that she had left John at the waterfall. And Jen had to remind her, we saw you pull up to my sister's house.
Oh, man. This is rough.
That's when Karen said she had no memory of going to the Albert house at all the night before. She did take the two women to the back of her car and said, look, I have a cracked taillight. Carrie then drove the three of them to Brian and Nicole Albert's home. But first, she circled the entire perimeter of the area where they'd hung out the night before. And the goal is to try to find John. According to Jen and Carrie, for the entire ride, Karen was hysterical. Now remember, there's a nor'easter. Now, Stephanie and I are here in Florida. I cannot even imagine what a whiteout looks like. But these are whiteout conditions. Like, you can't see
I'm
anything.
literally picturing like a hurricane, but with snow.
Pretty much, but it's pretty much where you almost can't see anything because everything is just white. The ground
Right.
is white, the air is white, the
Right.
sky is white,
Right.
everything's covered in white, several feet of snow. Once the three women arrived at the Albert home at 34 Fairview, Carrie and Jen said that Karen started screaming, there he is, there he is. And again, whiteout conditions, the other two women saw nothing.
Like, how do you see anything?
Right. But Karen jumped out of the car and ran straight to what was indeed an unusual mound located between a flagpole and a fire hydrant in the Albert yard. Under the snow was John, laying flat on his back, unresponsive. Carrie and Jennifer both called 911, and Karen attempted CPR. Canton police officer Stephen Seraph was the first to arrive on the scene, and he immediately observed that Karen was hysterical. He would later say that he heard Karen screaming over and over, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him. Now later Karen would say that she wasn't declaring that she hit him, but she was questioning, did I hit him? And another first responder on the
Well, how
scene...
could she be questioning, did I hit him, when she thinks she left him at the bar? Is somebody telling her, like, no, you were there? Like, has she finally accepted, like, you were at the Albert house?
She does...
You know what I'm saying? Like, is she finally like, oh, wait, maybe I was there?
She does eventually remember
Okay.
going to the Albert house.
Okay.
You
You know what I'm saying? Like, how do you go from, like, I last saw him at the bar to I might have hit him at this house that I don't even remember being at?
Well, that's a good question. That's a good question. My assumption is she realizes something's wrong and she's starting to put pieces together, kind of ask herself what could have happened.
Sure. But at that point, with that many people at the house, anybody could have hit him.
Okay, well.
What I'm
Yeah.
saying is, if she's slowly piecing things together, you know what I'm saying?
If he's
Like,
even been hit.
if he's even been hit. Okay,
Right.
that's a fair point too. Well, I guess, I don't know, the hit part, because she was saying maybe he got hit by a plow. So she's already thinking he could have been hit.
Which I find unusual.
Oh, you do?
I find that a little unusual. So I even talked to Andy, my husband, about it. And I was like, if I was at Stephanie's house, or if we were going to a party at Stephanie's house and you and I got in an argument and I walked in the house and you drove home and I never came home that night, would you automatically assume I was dead? He said, no, I would assume you spent the night at Stephanie's house. Now, this is a scenario that has never happened. And
Well,
but you know what I mean?
what, maybe he was accustomed to walking home though? Like, was that something he did?
Well, and some of these questions I don't have the answer to.
Right. If that was maybe a habit of yours that you walked places, maybe I wouldn't think too much of it. I don't know.
I do find it interesting that her very first thought before she even knew where he was, he could have been asleep on Brian and Nicole's
You know what?
couch.
You're right.
I find it strange. Her very
It
first thought
was,
was
"He's
maybe he
dead."
got hit by a plow. He's dead.
You know, that's a good point.
I think that's strange.
That's a good point.
There was another first responder on the scene that morning, Jason Becker, and he agreed with Karen, appearing to be questioning, did I hit him? Did I hit him? I'm talking to you about this because this is a big point of contention.
Okay.
I hit him versus did I hit him?
Oh, it's a big difference.
There's a big difference. And it would be really nice to know what was actually said. We're still unsure.
And it's just so open to interpretation too.
Right. Because I can see somebody be like, I hit him, and not actually declaring that I hit him, but being like, did I hit it? Like, I can see it going both ways.
And I think it's open to the whoever hears it, whoever's listening to it,
Right.
their interpretation of how she's saying it.
Absolutely. But I still think it's strange that that's even what she thinks happened.
Okay, fair. Well, I mean, he could have had a heart attack or something. Like,
Anything.
and the fact is, everybody was drunk. How do you need to just pass out and do it in a very inconvenient / deadly spot?
And she said he walked up to the door and started across the threshold, and then she just
Right.
looked down and then she left.
Right.
So why is she thinking she hit him? But again, at the same time, she doesn't even remember doing that at first. So
right.
it's just kind of a mess. Hold on. If you're already if you're questioning things, hold on, girl. Put your seatbelt on because it's only gonna get crazier. When John's body was moved, there was grass underneath his body.
Oh, okay.
So
He had been there a little bit.
it seems to me that he may have been there for a while because there's grass underneath him and yet several feet of snow.
Sure.
John was taken to Good Samaritan Hospital, where at 7:59 a.m., 46-year-old John O'Keefe was pronounced dead. Karen was taken to the hospital as well, where she was observed as she was heard saying things like, I don't want to live anymore.
Oh, okay.
And it was later determined that this was a normal reaction to
Yeah,
grief.
I
She
can see
wasn't, actually contemplating hurting herself. And she was ultimately allowed to leave the hospital, but not before a blood alcohol concentration test was performed. And her BAC at that time in the morning, several hours after she'd been out that night, was 0.08, the legal limit. Allegedly, Karen had had about 9 drinks while she was out the night before. So through a process called retrograde extrapolations, which is a scientific method used to estimate a BAC at a time in the past, the ER doctor put her at twice the legal limit during those hours when she and John were out earlier. So she shouldn't have been driving. Massachusetts State Police Officer Michael Proctor was the lead investigator on the case, and in the hours after John's death began speaking with first responders. The investigation included Karen being interviewed by Sergeant Buchanan. Sergeant Buchanan asked her about the events of the night before, and Karen said she didn't really want to go into a lot of details, but was willing to answer some questions. Karen told Buchanan that she and John had gotten into a fight the previous morning over what the kids ate for breakfast. She said that evening they met at a bar called C.F. McCarthy's at around 9 p.m. All the men were drinking Bud Lights and she was drinking a vodka soda. She said they left C.F. McCarthy's and moved to the waterfall where they stayed for about an hour. And after leaving the waterfall, she drove to 34 Fairview, where she again said she dropped John off. Buchanan asked if she saw him enter the home, and she said she did not. She said she made a 3-point turn and drove back to John O'Keefe's house. Buchanan asked Karen how she broke her taillight, and Karen said she didn't know how it happened, but it had happened sometime the night before. Karen's car was impounded. Now, back at 34 Fairview, Massachusetts State Police Special Emergency Response Team was processing the scene. But this was not their wheelhouse. They were not used to processing traffic homicides. They used a leaf blower to move the snow, and blood-stained snow was scooped into red Solo cups.
What?
Yes,
No.
the red Solo
No.
cups used for beer pong.
No.
These red Solo cups were obtained from a police officer who lived on the street, and the cups were then placed in paper Stop and Shop grocery bags.
What kind of backwoods police investigation is this?
Girl.
What
Girl.
is this? Please tell me you talked to Andy about this.
Oh, I definitely talked to Andy about
Okay.
this.
Yeah, Andy, it's Cynthia's husband. So
He's a law enforcement officer, and I
was
just
he
said,
appalled?
oh yeah, he was like, oh no, I would never do that.
I'm scared.
You should be. One of John's shoes was found at the scene. The other was with his body at the hospital. 2 red plastic pieces and 1 white piece of a taillight were also found at the scene. So broken taillight pieces were found at the scene. All of this is happening in the front yard of the Albert home, but not much was going on inside. Nobody in the home was officially interviewed. The house was not searched. The most that was done was a couple of officers entered the home to get brief statements from the witnesses inside, but the partygoers who were spoken to said John never entered the house, and the officers said they saw nothing out of the ordinary when they entered the foyer. Therefore, they had no probable cause to search the home. Now, police determined almost immediately none of that was necessary because Karen Reed hit John O'Keefe with her SUV and then left him in the snow to die.
Is it bad? I don't disagree with the police not investigating inside the house.
No, a lot of people believe that to be fair.
I do. This woman, clearly intoxicated, who's questioning herself about whether she hit him.
Allegedly. Depends on who you ask.
Okay, fine.
Oh, okay.
Well, no,
yes.
even in the best case scenario,
Yeah,
she's
no, asking her
questioning
question.
whether
Okay,
she did
I see
it.
what you're saying.
You know, I mean, in the worst case scenario, I mean, worse for her, like, she's saying,
Admitting it.
I
right.
did it.
Yeah.
The best case scenario, she's thinking I could have done it. Then you find pieces of tail light. He didn't come in the house. Like, I see how the crime scene would be the front yard.
Okay. And I get that. I really do. I personally, I'm not an attorney and I'm not a judge, I'm not a prosecutor, but personally, you're out with this group of people the night before. You end up back at the house and you're found dead on their lawn the next morning. The cause of death is not apparent immediately. We're going to learn he has some injuries that looked as if he potentially could have been in a fight. I don't know. I kind of feel like we should have gone into the house
Done
and
a little
looked.
bit more. I mean, maybe the fact that, you know, the residents of the home were police officers.
Oh, well, yeah. Ding, 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 ding,
I
ding, ding, ding.
mean,
but that's not
so
fair.
Okay. I mean, and maybe you're right. Maybe you're right. Maybe
Well-
they still should have been investigated. I mean, I'm sure they were able to give statements and they felt like they were being honest.
Yeah, but statements
and-
weren't taken immediately.
Well, okay, that's true too.
Let me tell you more. Tell
Okay.
you more. John's autopsy showed multiple abrasions on his right arm, several lacerations on his face, 2 black eyes. He had skull fractures conducive to blunt force trauma to the head. The medical examiner was unable to give conclusive manner of death or how the blunt force trauma occurred, but his cause of death was the blunt force trauma and hypothermia.
Okay.
On February 1st, 2022, Karen Reed was arrested and charged with motor vehicle homicide while under the influence of alcohol, manslaughter, and leaving the scene of a motor vehicle collision causing death. Karen pled not guilty and was released on a $50,000 bond. She hired a very impressive defense team consisting of David Unetti and Alan Jackson, and together they prepared a defense on the 3 initial charges. The case was brought before a grand jury, and on June 9th, 2022, Karen was arraigned on a second-degree murder charge. Now, second-degree murder means that this crime was not necessarily premeditated, but she would have known that her actions could kill John. So not an accident.
I don't know. That might be far reaching, in my opinion.
Once again, Karen pled not guilty. Her bail was set for $100,000, which she posted. On February 3rd, 2022, the day after Karen's first arrest, Karen's defense attorney, David Unetti, got a phone call from an unknown caller. This caller gave a fake name and told David, quote, "Your client is innocent," end quote. This man told David that Karen did not kill John. Instead, he was beaten up inside the Albert home. About a month after this initial phone call, the caller identified himself as former sheriff's deputy Steve Scanlon. Now, Scanlon told Karen's team that he had inside information, and he named the people in the party house that night and said they all needed to be looked at. Scanlon had a daughter who was friends with someone connected to Canton, and his daughter had spoken with someone who'd heard about what had happened at the Albert home that night, and she relayed the information to her father. When Unetti asked Steve to sign an affidavit, he refused. Months later, police brought Scanlon in to be interviewed, but this time he was much less convincing. Instead of saying, "This is what happened," like he allegedly had previously, to law enforcement, he only said it was a possibility.
Huh.
Scanlon allegedly told police that his motive in coming forward was to create relationships in an effort to find work.
Well, that doesn't seem like the right thing to do. That seems sketchy.
Well, Scanlon wasn't the only outsider to get involved in Karen's case. A local blogger named Turtle Boy, a pseudonym, obviously, took an interest.
Let's hope so.
Turtle Boy had a large following by the time he started writing about Karen, and he introduced the conspiracy theory / cover-up idea to the public. In April 2023, he began regularly writing about the case, posting multiple stories a day, and going live 2 or 3 times a week on YouTube. His narrative was that the law enforcement was framing Karen Read, and people bought it. Turtle Boy began uncovering relationships and shining light on connections between the people involved in the case, and as the cause spread, Karen Read supporters started trying to help as well. Turtle Boy ended up being arrested on charges of witness intimidation and harassing witnesses when witnesses claimed to have been doxxed by him.
What is that?
Doxxed is when someone publicly shares your information, like phone numbers or addresses.
Oh.
Jennifer McCabe, so one of the girls at the party that night, said that she had people coming by her house, taking videos, screaming at her. They would go to her child's sporting events. They would write letters to her children's colleges saying that her children should not be allowed to attend. She was called names. She was told to kill herself.
Social media is wild, y'all.
It's scary. Turtle Boy pled not guilty, but was ordered to stay away from all witnesses. He held a press conference saying reporting news is not harassment. He was arrested by Massachusetts State Police Detective Lieutenant Brian Tilley, who just happened to be one of the people he was exposing.
That might be a conflict.
On January 31st, 2024, Detective Lieutenant Brian Tilley filed an affidavit stating that Karen Read and Turtle Boy had been in contact. There were allegedly 189 phone calls lasting over 40 hours dating all the way back to April 2023. The investigation into his witness intimidation charges prompted a warrant to seize 2 cell phones from Karen Read, believing they could contain evidence of the ongoing conspiracy to intimidate witnesses. These searches found conversations in the spring of 2023 between Karen, her defense team, and Turtle Boy. Natalie Burschneider, a college friend of Karen's based in California, reconnected with Karen after she heard about Karen's case, and Natalie would send screenshots of her conversations with Karen to Turtle Boy. Karen shared everything with Natalie: the autopsy report, addresses, 911 calls, everything. And she would send these messages to Natalie saying, "Tell Turtle Boy," or "Don't share, but you and Turtle Boy can see." The conspiracy theory and cover-up idea created a narrative for the defense team and pushed Karen's case into the international spotlight.
Why wouldn't Karen just send them directly to Turtle Boy if she knew they were going? She may not have wanted everyone to know she's sharing with Turtle Boy, but she's sending them to a friend with instructions to give them to Turtle Boy.
She is, but it doesn't look good if the defense is wrapped up with people who are literally being charged with witness intimidation. Like, that's not good.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm saying is she didn't do the best job at distancing herself either.
No, I'm with you. I'm with you.
You know what I mean? You need to be a few more steps removed.
You need to be a little sneakier.
Yeah, and what was in it for Turtle Boy? Outside of he just wanted to involve himself in the case?
Yeah.
Okay.
I can only presume he believes Karen Reed innocent and he has a platform.
Okay. That seems like a lot. Does he have a crush on her or something? He just wants to be involved in this case.
Yeah.
Okay.
The conspiracy theory is that John was at the Albert house. He was beaten up in the basement and or attacked by the Albert's dog and then moved outside and left in the snow to die.
By the dog?
By the dog. Karen was then framed through planted evidence.
They're going to go to her house and break off pieces of her truck and then come back and sprinkle them around John's body?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Furthering this theory is the idea that the Albert family is powerful and connected to other powerful people, specifically people in law enforcement. I mean, why else was the investigation so rushed? This was a cover-up to protect their own. Police made a judgment at the scene, never went inside the home to investigate. Now, I'm being a little facetious here, but actually it seems to me like Stephanie and I are already kind of seeing things from different points of view. Because it seems to me like so far you think maybe everything seems on board. Now, in fairness, I know more than you do about this case.
To me at this point, in Occam's razor is Karen.
I'm with you there.
To me, the straightest point, not knowing everything else that you're going to tell me, the straightest point from A to B is Karen accidentally hit him.
I'm with you. I agree with that. Absolutely 100%. I just don't think a thorough investigation was done.
And that's, I can be on board with that as well.
Karen's trial was projected to last between 6 and 8 weeks, and it began on April 16th, 2024, and was presided over by Judge Beverly Cannoni. In trial, Karen's phone records were presented, and in the hours leading up to finding John's body, Karen called John more than 50 times, and she was not happy, cussing him out, calling him names. It appears through her text she must have believed he was seeing another woman. She sent text, very angry text. She called him a pervert. Prosecution tells us that Karen's motive for killing John was she believed he was about to leave her and she didn't want the relationship to end. And they used Karen's voicemail and text to show how angry Karen was at John, as if this was a motive for her killing him.
Okay, but this is overnight
Mm-hmm.
and in the morning
Mm-hmm.
when he's already dead.
Yes.
So that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
But it still could be accidental, is what I'm saying.
I'm with you. I agree.
Okay. I don't think it's intentional if it was Karen.
I think a lot of people think that. Problem is, that's not what she's being accused of.
Oh, right. I understand.
She's not being accused of accidentally hitting him.
I understand.
She's been accused of second-degree murder. And you hit the nail on the head. The prosecution is saying, look how angry she was at him. She killed him that night. And the defense is saying what you said. He's already dead when she's sending these messages. Why would somebody, knowing their partner is dead, send all these messages that make them look angry, that make them look like they may have had motive?
So it's not necessarily that it was premeditated, but that she knew her actions could cause his death.
Right.
Could that action have literally just been operating a motor vehicle while intoxicated? Because the bottom line is, I know if I operate this vehicle while I'm intoxicated, I could absolutely cause someone's death.
Right.
So if that's the case, she did operate the vehicle knowing she could cause someone bodily harm.
Right. I see what you're saying. And to me, sure, that makes sense. In this scenario, from everything I've seen, and I listened to a lot of the trial, the prosecution never once alleged she was drunk and accidentally hit him.
So that's not their angle. I could see arguing that, like drunk drivers, you knew. You had you could have taken an Uber. You could have called someone to get you. You could have slipped it off. You could have done it, but you didn't. And then you caused someone's death. You knew getting in this car could endanger someone. Right. But that's not what they're arguing.
They are not arguing that she was drunk and shouldn't have been driving.
Okay.
And because
accidentally hit him.
No, that they are arguing she killed him.
Is an angry girlfriend and killed him.
And on the flip of that, the defense could have used the same argument. It was an accident. They could use it was an accident. She didn't see him. It was a whiteout. It was snowing.
Right.
He ran back. She saw him run up to the house and she didn't see.
And listen, had the alcohol not come into play, I think that would absolutely be a reasonable defense, I guess. I don't even know if it's
but
just
it was an accident. It was an accident. And here's the thing, though. From what I've heard, proving that someone was driving drunk is actually difficult because even that test they did where they kind of guesstimate how intoxicated she may have been, a lot of it is just best guess.
Yeah, but also they said she had 9 drinks. I'm assuming that information came from a bartender or people that were with her. I don't know. So all I'm saying is she had drinks and she was operating a motor vehicle.
And she was 0.08 when they tested her.
Right.
The next morning.
Right.
So I think it's safe to say she was intoxicated.
Yes.
And honestly, I think it's safe to say that her accidentally hitting him could have absolutely happened.
Oh, sure.
But it's not what either side is arguing.
Wild.
The prosecution told the jury that microscopic pieces of Karen's broken taillight were found in John's clothing. And these pieces were too small to have been planted by hand. They couldn't even be picked up. Pieces that were big enough to handle came back with traces of John's DNA. So Karen's broken taillight came back with traces of DNA. Let me tell you, there's a lot about this broken taillight, okay? There are photographs of Karen Reed's vehicle where it doesn't look like her taillight was broken. There are witnesses who say the taillight was cracked, but it was still in one piece. The defense absolutely is saying that this taillight was planted. So I'm just telling you now, the taillight is a huge point of contention so far as the Canton Library has surveillance footage that was working this evening. Okay. It was catching vehicles driving by. The Canton Library is about a mile from John's house. And Karen Reed, on her way home from the Albert home, drove past the Canton Library. The 2 minutes that her vehicle would have driven through this surveillance footage and shown us, did she have a broken taillight or not?
Yeah.
Are missing from the footage.
Oh, that's weird.
All of the footage is working. The cameras were working. They have all the footage from that night, except for the 2-minute period when Karen Reed would have driven past the library.
And what, it just blacks out? It's just not
there? It's just missing. Nobody can say why.
Ooh, that's weird. But planting taillight, especially the microscopic pieces, how do you do that? In a whiteout?
Yeah.
Okay.
I will tell you this. The microscopic pieces of Karen's broken taillight were found in John's clothing.
Right.
John's clothing was stored in the trunk of Michael Proctor's car. Now, we're going to talk a lot about Michael Proctor in episode 2.
Okay.
I'm just going to tell you right now, that could be the answer to our question, potentially. Okay. Or at least the defense might say that's the answer to our question. I will tell you, in case I haven't been clear about it, the defense's theory is that everybody involved that night, everybody at the house party, the Canton police, and most of the people involved in this investigation are all part of this conspiracy theory / cover-up.
So basically, everyone is guilty except for Karen.
Everybody is covering up for somebody.
Right. Okay.
Yes. That's the defense's,
seems like a lot,
narrative. A piece of John's hair was found on the rear quarter panel of Karen's SUV. John's phone was found laying underneath his body.
Okay.
A lot of this evidence at the scene was found at different times, which the defense kind of says, yeah, because it was planted.
Right.
The prosecution says, well, yeah, it's because a lot of this evidence was in snow, and some of it was not found until the snow was moved or melted. Both responses could be true.
Sure. We didn't see it until we got the snowblower out in the Solo cups.
Right. The defense questioned when Karen's taillight was cracked, alleging it didn't even happen that night. And one of the reasons for their questioning of this was at one point there was a bag of taillight evidence that had 3 pieces of a broken light. And then at another point, this bag had 5 pieces of broken light. Now, did the 3 pieces just break more and turn into 5? I don't know.
Yeah.
I will tell you that the pieces of broken taillight do not match the picture of the broken taillight.
Oh, like if you were to lay them out like a puzzle, they don't fit?
It doesn't look like it matches.
Huh. Okay.
There was a law enforcement on the scene, Officer Barrows, who testified when he saw the vehicle, the taillight was cracked with a small piece missing, but no major damage to the taillight at all. So, as I mentioned, the taillight, real big point of contention.
Yeah, I see that. And how are there so many conflicting stories about a taillight? So crazy.
It is. But it's one of those things. If the taillight really was broken the night before, then it could lead to her having hit him.
Right.
If it wasn't broken,
right,
but yet is found with him,
right,
is found on his clothing, is found at the scene, but yet it wasn't broken,
right,
and we have that on footage from the Canton Library surveillance,
right,
well, then how did it get there?
right.
So it would be really nice to know, to have a definite answer.
Has the defense offered any kind of motive?
Yes. And we'll talk about it. I will tell you now, the only way you're going to know what's going on in this case, you have to listen to both episodes.
Okay, got it.
You just have to. Nobody will have the full story until you listen to both episodes. This first episode, I'm just kind of giving you like the initial thoughts and the initial ideas. And then the second episode, I'm going to go more into actual testimony.
Yeah.
And then experts and what was allegedly proven and how it all ties together. In regards to the taillight, there was security footage of John's home on January 29th that showed Karen backing out on her way to go look for him. And it appears that she may have backed into John's vehicle, which was parked at the end of the driveway. You can't see for sure, but it looks like she hit him. And we know she's frantic. Honestly, she's still at the legal limit. Like, she could still be intoxicated, quite frankly. So we're not positive, but it does look like she made contact with his car based on the angles that we're seeing. Maybe that was when her taillight broke. Maybe her taillight wasn't even broken the night before. We just don't know.
Okay. So stressful.
Right. I will tell you, none of the taillight was found near his vehicle. So if she did break it there was no evidence of that. John was seen on security footage leaving the waterfall carrying a glass, and a glass was found crushed at the scene. This is like a glass that you'd have like a whiskey or something in.
Okay, got it.
Federal investigators hired a professional accident reconstructionist, and their conclusion was that John's injuries were inconsistent with car damage, and car damage found on Karen's SUV was inconsistent with his injuries. Yet the prosecutor's theory remains that Karen, in her anger, backed out of the Albert home at a high rate of speed and hit John O'Keefe, causing his body to fly 30 to 40 feet, which, if you remember, his phone was found underneath him.
Yeah, that doesn't make a lot of sense.
It's believed that John and Karen got into Karen's SUV to leave the waterfall at around 12:13 a.m., and John's smartwatch stopped recording movement at 12:32 a.m. Trooper Joe Paul, a Massachusetts State Police crash reconstruction expert, testified about what is called key cycles. So a key cycle is the time frame from when the key is inserted into the ignition of a vehicle to when the vehicle is turned off. Modern vehicles have the equivalent of like an airplane black box in them. And so during key cycles, there can be triggering events recorded on the vehicle. So not always, but there could be. So like, say you were in a little minor fender bender and the airbags.
Yeah, or like slamming on the brakes and things like that. Yeah.
These are triggering events. To break it down as simply as I can, Karen's vehicle's key cycles were reviewed. Trooper Paul obviously had to look into like the black box of Karen's SUV, right?
Sure.
And in order to do this, he had to have his own key cycles. The key cycles are numbered. So key cycles are when you put the key in, turn it on.
Yes.
They're numbered.
Okay.
All right. Key cycle 1163 is the last key cycle before Trooper Paul begins his test, like his testing on it. So I'm going to count down. So if key cycle 1164 is testing, key cycle 1163 was her car being turned on, her SUV being turned on so that it could be driven into where it was being stored with the police.
Yes.
Key cycle 1162 was the car being turned on so that it could be driven onto the tow truck. That's the key cycle with the triggering events. So the key cycle where prosecution saying this is where the accident occurred.
Oh, got it.
Is key cycle 1162. However, if you're counting backwards, we know these things had to happen. We know the car had to be turned on to be driven to where it was being stored. We know the car had to be turned on to be driven onto the tow truck. So it's not lining up. There's either missing key cycles.
Was it driven onto the tow truck?
The prosecution didn't deny it when the defense brought it up.
Because I was going to say, you don't have to drive it onto the tow truck.
Maybe not, but this is what we were presented with at trial.
Okay. Because I think often they don't drive them on, like they pull them out, they put them in neutral.
Well, sometimes you can't even be.
Yeah.
But to put a car in neutral, doesn't the key have to be in?
No.
It doesn't have to be?
I think they can just manually put it in, but I don't know.
Well, let's say it wasn't. Let's say that the vehicle was not turned on to be put on the tow truck. Then that would make it the key cycle where the vehicle was being driven by Karen to her parents' home.
Right. Either way, it doesn't fit. Either way, it doesn't fit.
Not the key cycle from the night where the accident
Either
occurred.
way, it doesn't fit.
Before that was the key cycle where Karen was driving from John's house to Jen McCabe's. Before that was Karen driving from the waterfall to John's house. That would have been the key cycle with the triggering
she's made
events.
a lot of other trips. So for that one to be
right. So I'm sorry if this is confusing, but the whole point is prosecution saying, look at these triggering events right here. Must have been when it happened.
But they don't line up with what's going on.
They don't line up with what we know the car was doing, which in turn also tells us that there were no triggering events during the time when she would have actually been at the Albert home.
However, I don't know. I will just say SUV collision with a human, I don't know that that would even register as a triggering event.
I don't either.
So just the fact that there was no triggering event prior to that, in my opinion, doesn't mean there wasn't one.
Well, and maybe not, but they're saying her reversing at a higher rate of speed was a triggering event, and her making a 3-point turn in the driveway area was a triggering event. So I don't know that they're saying that the triggering event was the impact.
Okay, got it.
But at the same time, I don't know. I would think that if you hit somebody hard enough to cause them to fly 30 to 40 feet, that could be a triggering event, right?
Yeah, but I don't think that happened either. So
we have our own theory, and it's not what prosecution or defense says.
No, honestly, I think both of them are reaching too far out of reality.
Okay.
Out of what the evidence is showing.
Yeah.
That's just my opinion.
No, we probably agree more than you think. I'm saving my opinion to the very end.
Okay.
But I don't think you're
I just feel
in
like
crazy land over there.
Okay, thank you. So I feel like the defense and the prosecution are just so far on opposite sides of the spectrum. It's like, okay, but the truth is probably somewhere in the middle.
Right.
That's where I'm feeling. That's where I'm leaning.
I think you are. I think that's very reasonable. I really do. Now, the people who were hanging out with John and Karen that evening were called to testify, and during his examination, Brian Higgins testified that he lived alone, and on January 29th, 2022, he said he made no phone calls when he got home. He said he was alone that night and no one else was in his bedroom. However, phone records revealed that Brian Albert called Brian Higgins at 2:22 a.m. on January 29th. That call went unanswered, but 17 seconds later, Brian Higgins called Brian Albert back. That call also went unanswered, but lasted 22 seconds. So I'm guessing for the ringing and such. First, Brian Higgins said this was a butt dial, but then he was reminded that he had said he put his phone on the bedside table. And in interviews, both men claimed that both calls were accidental. Now, why does any of this matter? Again, defense is alleging something happened that night and everybody's working together to cover it up.
It just sounds like two drunk dudes. I don't know. Is that weird? Like, I'm just like, I just think it's a lot of intoxicated people.
Well, you know what? So do I. But it's reasonable doubt.
I agree.
All defense has to do, they don't have to prove anything. They just have to raise
But they didn't speak to each other.
doubt.
They didn't text message each other. I mean, what is it like? If you ring 2 times, we did it. If we ring 3 times, the police are here. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it just doesn't.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean that, I don't know, that at least one of them didn't want to talk to the other one. I don't know.
All right.
During trial, Timothy Nuttall, who was a Canton firefighter paramedic, testified that he heard Karen say, I hit him. She was erratic, hysterical, distraught, but he was focused on patient care. Steve Milani, a Canton police officer, was at the crime scene. He did not hear her say she hit him. Anthony Flumati, a Canton Fire Department lieutenant and lead paramedic, remembered a conversation where Karen told him, "I hit him. Oh my God, I hit him." But defense attorney Alan Jackson provided video from the scene and asked Flumati to review it and tell him where in that video he engaged with Karen. And there was no place in the video where Flumati spoke to Karen.
Oh, snap.
According to a police report by Sergeant Gary Butnick, Flumati relayed during an interview with Sergeant Butnick that Karen said, "I hit him." Anthony Flumati did not remember having that conversation. Anthony also did not put this in his own report. However, as a first responder, it is his primary job to focus on patient care, not necessarily make a report.
Fair.
Frances Walsh, a firefighter and paramedic at the crime scene, recalled 3 women who we now know are Carrie Roberts, Jennifer McCabe, and Karen Reed. Frances said all 3 women were visibly shaken up, especially Karen, and he recalled her asking, "Is he alive?" Walsh said that this stood out because she appeared the most upset and continued screaming. Katie McLaughlin, an ambulance driver and friend of Brian and Nicole Albert's daughter, Caitlin, told Trooper Proctor that Karen said, "I hit him, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him." During trial, when she was asked if that was her testimony, she said, "If that's what's in quotes, then yes." After hearing Karen say this, Katie said she went back to the ambulance and in front of Anthony Flumati and Timothy Nettle, she said that Karen had said she hit him. So the 2 people previously who were saying Karen said this, none of this was in any of their reports. Katie explained 2 people write reports on a call. One is the lead paramedic and the other is the officer on scene. And she was neither of those, which is why she did not write what she heard in any report. The prosecution spent 4 days of trial trying to convince the jury that Karen admitted to hitting John. I just spent maybe 5 minutes and it's already like, okay, we get it. We get it.
Monotony.
I know. But I wanted you to have a taste. Prosecution spent 4 days of trial trying to convince this jury Karen admitted to hitting John. However,
these poor jurors.
Jurors, right. Yeah. None of it was ever caught on camera. None of it made it into any reports. The most prosecution could ever provide was hearsay.
Yeah, that's not good enough. Sorry.
It's not. The defense team focused a lot of attention on how the scene was processed. Canton Police Department collected bloody snow evidence in red Solo cups, as we've discussed. These cups were borrowed from a fellow police officer who lived on the street. And then the red Solo cups were placed uncovered in a Stop and Shop paper bag. Lieutenant Paul Gallagher, who was responsible for preserving the crime scene, was called to stand to explain the evidence handling. He testified that they had taken 6 blood samples. The blood samples were frozen, and Gallagher was unsure how to collect them. He didn't think swabbing, which would be the normal way to collect blood samples, he didn't think the swabbing would work, so he decided to find a temporary plastic evidence container. Solo cup.
Okay. I mean, but they don't have any, sample vial. You know what I'm saying? Like the little sample cups?
You know, he was asked that. They do not.
Okay.
The defense specifically asked why, if the crime scene was only about a mile or a mile and a half from the Canton Police Department, why didn't someone travel back to the police department to get the proper evidence collection equipment? And Gallagher said they didn't have anything that would have been appropriate for collecting frozen blood samples.
Well,
so they had to improvise.
That is terrifying.
Gallagher was asked about sterile swabs and asked why they weren't used. And Gallagher said because the blood was frozen, he didn't think it was a viable way to collect the evidence. He said he took 6 individual samples and then let the crime lab extract it any way they best saw fit.
This watered down blood?
Yep.
Okay.
That was then placed uncovered in a grocery store paper bag, not even an evidence bag, a grocery store paper bag.
This is quality.
So what could have been done in this situation? I understand. Maybe they don't have the proper evidence collecting
Literally,
tools.
you know what I'm picturing are the ones at the vet's office, the little sample, or the gynecologist's office where you pee in the cup.
Anything.
Why don't they have those? Or the little vials, or how do you not have that?
Right. One of the EMS, one of the first responders, worst case scenario, go to the pharmacy or the hospital, get a package of sterile gauze,
Right.
anything.
So I'm assuming they were not able to extract anything from this watered down blood.
Here's the thing. I don't even know that they tried. But
Well, and
that's
fair. It's contaminated. It's not,
Right.
nothing's been preserved. Is
Right.
the idea that it could have been someone's blood besides John?
That has
Or
never
no one
been
knows?
said.
Because I guess I'm saying, like, what did they think it could be?
I think the idea of even bringing any of this up is just you guys
Just
don't
reasonable
know
doubt.
what you're doing.
Yes. Okay.
So if you're going to process a crime scene by putting blood evidence in a Solo cup and then in a grocery bag,
No, it's ridiculous.
then how can we trust anything you've
Like,
done
what
on
are
this
your
crime
county
scene?
dollars going towards? What are you
Right.
even doing?
Right. Because the truth of the matter is, if anything, it would probably help Karen's case, because you would think that not protecting the evidence would actually allow other people's DNA to get, let's say it's her blood or something that comes back and like points to her, but yet whoever it was that opened the Solo cups DNA was there. That would actually help her, because it would, you know what I mean?
It's weird.
But you know what I'm saying? If anything, it's going to add DNA as opposed to
Yeah.
like taking it away, only
Yeah.
leaving hers.
Yeah.
But defense is just like, you guys just don't know what you're doing. Was the whole point of making a big deal of it.
Well,
And I agree.
I agree. I agree with that sentiment.
Right. When defense asked about using the leaf blowers to move the snow away from the crime scene, because this could disturb evidence, this could move evidence.
Yeah. What do you do in this
Well-
situation? I mean, I agree it doesn't sound great, but what do you do?
I don't know. And that's kind of what Gallagher said. Gallagher said this was a unique scene with lots of snow. He'd never processed a scene in the snow before, but he had seen leaf blowers used in snow before, and it appeared to be quite effective and actually pretty controlled. And he said the snow was continuing to pile up, and he was noticing light pink spots in the snow that he thought may have been blood that had then been covered with more snow. And he wanted to be able to investigate those spots before it was lost. So it was just kind of
I don't
the best he knew to do.
They lost me on the Solo cups and the cups in the bag. Because I feel like there's much better. But honestly, once you've kind of covered the surface, what do you do? A shovel? That's going to disturb things too.
If it was just the leaf blower, I don't really have a problem with that.
No matter what, your evidence is getting destroyed either by the snow or the removal of the snow. I don't have an issue with the leaf blower as much
I
as
don't
I
either.
do with the Solo cups and the grocery bag.
The Solo cups and the grocery bag are asinine. The leaf blower, I have no problem with.
Yeah.
The
I mean, even a Tupperware container with a lid or open cups in a bag. What are you doing?
You were just given the defense gold is what you're doing.
We have a saying in our family, slapdash, and it's basically like a half-ass move.
Okay.
That's what that feels like to me.
Yeah.
Slapdash.
Yeah,
That's what that
it's
is.
something. It is something. Gallagher was able to use these leaf blowers, this leaf blower method, to get almost down to the ground and in an approximately 6 by 6 foot size area. So the leaf blowers were effective in
Removing the snow.
Gallagher did not remember finding any bright red taillight material or clear taillight material during this processing, but he did find broken glass from the actual drinking glass. Now, the defense said that the fact that there was broken glass from a drinking glass found at the scene should have prompted a search of the Albert home, because where do you get a glass? From inside a home, perhaps? And potentially that is where the glass came from. Now, we know that John was seen holding a glass in
Right. It
surveillance
could have come from the
video.
bar. Yeah.
We know that. But I do think it's a good question. How did you know that? You hadn't seen the surveillance footage.
Right.
You just found a broken glass in a
I
driveway.
think that's fair. That's a fair point.
Right. Gallagher said because the group had come from a bar, they assumed this is where the glass came from.
Do people often steal glasses from bars?
This group did.
Well,
John wasn't the only one.
was gonna
Karen
say-
had one.
I've never done that before. I'm like, is that a common thing to just go home with the glasses from the bar?
Girl, here's what I will tell you. And as a police officer's wife, this is another one of those cases where I get kind of offended because they're all driving drunk.
Right.
They're stealing glasses. I don't love it.
That's like teenagers do. Like,
I know.
What are you doing?
And they should know better.
Yeah.
They should know better. I don't love
I didn't
Hager.
say it originally because I was like, what did he just wander out with a glass? What are you doing?
Yeah, they did.
Okay.
Gallagher's response to, why they didn't search the home despite finding this glass was, again, there was no probable cause to search the home. He didn't ask for consent from the homeowners to search the home, and he did not go to a judge asking to search the home. Again, a couple officers entered the foyer area, but since they saw nothing out of the ordinary, they felt no further need to look any further. The defense thought it was more likely the home was never searched due to the relationships between local law enforcement and the witnesses.
Probably.
Also, local law
Yes.
enforcement. Sergeant Michael Link had been friends with Brian and Chris's brother, Kevin Albert, who was also a police officer. Kevin
Sure.
wasn't there that
Right.
night, but
Right.
another connection. They'd been friends since they were teenagers, and they were friends and co-workers. And Sergeant Link arrived at the crime scene around 6:24 in the morning, and instead of separating the witnesses prior to their being questioned, which is standard practice,
Yeah.
he allowed all of the witnesses to talk amongst themselves.
After providing solo cups, he asked them to just talk amongst themselves
That's right.
and compare their stolen glassware.
That's right. Sergeant Link did not see John's body, but relayed to dispatch that what he had been told. And Link indicated trauma to John's head and said he was unsure if John had been in a fight or whatever, but paramedics do not believe he's going to make it. The defense was able to get Link to admit that while at the crime scene, the possibility that John had been involved in a physical altercation had not been ruled out. And if there had been an altercation, it could have possibly occurred inside the home. Link said that during his investigation, he learned that none of the witnesses put John in the house, but all of the witnesses weren't interviewed until days after John's death. So again,
when they potentially had time to collaborate their stories.
Right. So Sergeant Link clarified that Jennifer McCabe told him that John never entered the home, and that was enough for him. Brian Albert and Nicole Albert were both called to testify. Nicole had said it had been a nice evening at the waterfall. There were no fights, no arguments. And once they got back to the house, everything was great. Brian testified the same way. He said he wasn't super close with John, but said they were friends and enjoyed hanging out. He said he'd never hung out with Karen Reed before, but the defense questioned this. And it turns out after denying that he'd ever even met or seen Karen before, he changed his statement and said he did remember meeting her once before. During this testimony, the defense laid out another theory. The wounds on John's arm looked like they could have been consistent with a dog bite. What if John was in an altercation with one of the Alberts and their dog, who had bitten people before, tried to protect its owners and attacked John? Less than 5 months after John's death, the Alberts rehomed their dog Chloe, a German Shepherd mix, and Brian said they rehomed the dog that they'd had for almost 7 years because she was in a dog fight in May 2022. We need to note there was no animal DNA on John's body. The Alberts also sold their home, something the defense said seemed suspicious because maybe they just wanted to get rid of all the evidence, get rid of the dog, get rid of the house.
Well, there was no DNA, canine DNA, found on John, and I'm pretty sure Chloe cannot speak.
Right.
So I don't know what evidence that would be. I think bite mark evidence has been ruled out as junk science, so I don't think that would work. So, okay.
Well, and here's the other thing. Say there was an altercation at the house, and then the dog attacked John. The dog is the perfect cover-up.
None of this makes any sense.
The dog's the
Exactly. It'd be
cover-up.
like, the dog just went crazy.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, the dog would probably be put down, I guess, would be a reason for not doing
Well,
that.
and also, did a dog cause blunt force trauma to his head?
Maybe they could say he fell.
Maybe.
I don't know.
I don't know. This dog theory seems silly to me.
The dog and the selling of the home, I think we're just kind of grasping at straws here.
Yeah.
On day 11 of the trial, the prosecution called witness Julie Neagle, one of Brian Albert Jr.'s friends who was there at the house celebrating his birthday, to testify. And she told the court that she may have seen a dark object in the front lawn when she was leaving the Albert home in the early morning hours of January 29th. She said the object was 5 or 6 feet long and laying in the area of the flagpole. She said she first noticed it when she was driving past, but she didn't put 2 and 2 together until the next day when she learned what happened to John. She testified that obviously if she'd known at the time that she had seen a body, she would have realized that this was important and called the police. But the defense cross-examined Julie and asked why then, if the next day, after learning what happened to John, she put 2 and 2 together and realized she'd possibly seen his body laying there the night before, why didn't she report that to the police? The first time she ever publicly mentioned to anyone seeing this object was while she was on the stand. Julie left the Albert home between 12:30 and 1:30 that morning, and during that same time frame, 6 other people left this party. So could it be possible that John was laying there the whole time and no one else saw him?
Yes.
I guess it's possible.
It's a whiteout, right?
Right. Yeah.
And they're all drunk.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's possible. It seems strange.
It does seem strange. And for me, the kicker isn't whether or not anybody else saw him. I think the defense raises a good point. You realize the next day, I saw him. I didn't know that's what I saw, but I saw him when we left the party last night. He was laying there and you don't say anything.
I don't know, maybe you're embarrassed or you feel guilty or you think you could have helped him if you had known it was him. Well, maybe there could be some other reasons.
Yes, that is true. But then you're going to say it 2 years later. You're going to come forward.
Well,
and
no,
say
that's
it?
weird.
So that's strange to me. I think the defense raised a good point there. Like, why are you just now saying this now? Because she didn't do anything wrong. She didn't do anything wrong. Even if it was him, even if she did see it,
No,
it's
I
not
agree.
her
it's,
fault.
It's poor timing, for
Right.
sure.
That's where I'm going to leave you for episode 1. Okay?
Oh, that's a lot.
It's a
Thank
lot.
goodness. This is actually the one time I'm like, okay, good.
Yeah.
I think I need a little breather.
I feel like
'cause this is a lot.
It's a lot. Now, I will tell you, episode 2 is a little lighter on the, it's not lighter, but it's lighter on the information.
Yeah.
We're going to be going over testimony. We're going to be going over some of these personalities that we've talked about, the cast of characters.
There's quite a few.
And I will tell you that next week's episode is where it gets wild. So this was kind of the heavier episode where it's like, okay, we got to keep notes. We got to keep track. Next week, you're going to be feeling some things.
Ooh, okay. Well, I already kind of am. Mostly confusion. So not at your presentation at all, but it's a lot.
It's a lot. And I think this may be the one case where, you know what? It wasn't the long form content. It wasn't the long form content, Cynthia, where you were having a hard time following. It's just a lot. And I will tell you, there's a lot of really good stuff I have not mentioned because, again, we're not doing a long form presentation here. Well, this case is interesting.
Thank goodness you didn't take 4 days to determine whether she said, I hit him, because I don't think that I could have done that.
I think I took maybe 4 minutes and I could feel you squirming in your chair like, I get it. She did or she didn't.
She did or she... We're not going to be able to figure it out either way.
Right.
Some say she did, some say she didn't. I don't know. We don't know.
Right.
We don't know. So whenever we just don't know, I just throw it out because I'm like, okay, those two cancel each other out because you can't determine.
Right.
You don't know.
Yeah.
All right. As promised, I am going to give you a little bit more information about our Branch of Hope nonprofit organization for the month of January 2025. We are sponsoring the Victim Connect Resource Center, which is a referral helpline where crime victims can learn about their rights and options confidentially and compassionately. Victim Connect Resource Center assists victims of assault, child abuse and neglect, domestic violence, elder abuse and neglect, financial fraud, homicide and grief, human trafficking, mass violence, sexual assault, stalking, and as it pertains to the first episode of the month, possible hate crimes. Victim Connect's Resource Center is a weekday phone, chat, and text-based referral helpline operated by the National Center for Victims of Crime. Services are available for all victims of crime in the United States and its territories. Visitors to the hotline receive strength-based and trauma-informed services and referrals in over 200 languages, which I know we commented on the last week. That's incredible.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
The victim assistance specialists receive extensive training and mentoring to provide emotional support, information, and referrals that empower visitors as they navigate the physical, emotional, legal, and financial consequences of crime. Referrals are tailored to individual needs and can be made to local, state, and national organizations. If you or someone you know is in need of victim assistance, please call at 1-888-4-VICTIMS or chat with them online. And if you are part of our Patreon program, a portion of your sponsorship is going to go directly to Victim Connect Resource Center. And if you want to find out more about that, if you want to sponsor us as creators and also be part of our charitable foundation, you can do so by going to Patreon. Find us at the Dark Oak Patreon. And also that's linked in our show notes too. So you can just click on it and it'll take you right to our Patreon page.
Don't forget to join us next week where we go over part 2.
Part
Karen
2.
Reed. We're going to be talking about the trial. Trooper Proctor, who, if you know anything about this case, you might recognize that name. It's a lot.
All
A
right.
specific Google search. How long to die in the cold? Y'all, you got to come back next week.
Fun.
Oh, yeah.
All right, Shiver Seekers. We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye-bye. This episode of The Dark Oak was created, researched, written, recorded, hosted, edited, published, and marketed by Cynthia and Stephanie of Just Us Gals Productions, and made possible by you, our shiver-seeking listener. Special thanks goes to Justice Himes for our incredible artwork and Ryan Crete for our amazing music.